Chapter 1. Opportunity. Late into the night, Fang Li was staring into the old roof of the room that he shared with his younger brother. It was made of little more than mud, hay, and the odd twigs. It amazed him that it still had not collapsed on them. It looked like it could barely support its weight, much less the occasional snow and rain. Laying next to him was his younger brother, Fang Zhu, who was soundly asleep. The two of them shared a quilt that had been in his family for as long as he could remember. The original color was a mystery that he and his brother would likely never solve. The quilt, however, did emit the faintest smell of mold. But by now, the two boys were already well tiny. The bed practically took up the entire room. Aside from the bed, there was a small chest that contained all his and his brother's earthly belongings. If he was honest with himself, his earthly belongings really didn't amount to much. A few shirts and pants that were passed down from his father or elder brothers and a few misshapen wooden swords that he had made to pass the time. There was an old brown dirt wall that separated them from the living room. Because of how old the wall was, it had already started coming apart. He really had to give it to whoever built this house. It was something for the wall to start falling apart before the roof. Through the cracks of the wall, he heard his parents talking in a low whisper. He couldn't tell what they were talking about, but it didn't sound good. In between sentences, his mother would let out a soft whimper and his dad would release a sigh. It seemed like they were making a difficult parents and let them know that everything would be okay. But how was a 10-year-old boy supposed to say that with any certainty? The answer was he couldn't. All he knew was that, if he didn't fall asleep soon, he would be too tired in the morning to help his parents with the land. He placed his parents' conversation to the back of his mind and forced his eyes back. Typical farmhand. Like most of the people in the village, he had darker skin due to the time he spent in the fields. Aside from his family, he didn't have many friends from the village. Most kids his age were too immature for his liking. He wanted to grow up fast so he could take on more responsibilities from his parents. Because of this, he had always acted older than his age. At the same time, he had a small spark of hope that he could leave this hard life behind and travel the world and meet new people. He knew that it was impossible. Essentially, in his family's condition, he couldn't help but feel guilty for even having people. Fang Li's parents, his two older brothers and one younger brother, and lastly the youngest sister. Fang Li was sandwiched as the very middle child of the family. His two older brothers had both moved out. His oldest brother, Fang Zhang, became a carpenter in the village won over. His second brother, Fang Jian, had joined the army some time ago. Every few months, the brothers would get a letter delivered letting the family know they were safe. He knew that his parents were very proud of his two older brothers. Each time, when their names would come up in conversation, his parents' backs would be a tiny bit straighter, and held their chins ever slightly higher. Fang Da were working the family land. They heard a carriage coming down the dirt path that led to their humble home. The two of them looked up and saw a familiar face. It was his uncle, his father's younger brother, Fang Tang. When Fang Li was younger, his uncle would visit the family after the new year and would always come bearing gifts. The most prosperous member of the Fang family. There was even some fat on his body that would be hard to keep if the man wasn't eating well. When Fang Li's father inherited the family land, Fang Tang decided he would take his chances in the nearby city. There, he started out as a waiter in one of the biggest restaurant inn in the city. Throughout the years, he climbed his way to the top through his hard work and competence to the position of general manager. If he was to proclaim himself the second most successful person to come out of the village, no one would dare claim to number one. Fang Li was still young and didn't know much. But he had heard his parents thank this uncle of his when his eldest brother had gained the carpenter apprenticeship and again when his second brother was recruited to the house. Fang Li and his father stopped what they were doing and hurriedly met Fang Tang as he disembarked. There was a smile on the faces of both the adults as they greeted each other. It had been over 6 months since Fang Tang had visited. But it was still another 6 months before his customary New Year's visit. As they finished their pleasantries, Fang Tang looked over to Fang Li and embraced him in a bear hug. Fang Li had been working the fields all morning and his clothes were filthy, to say the least, but Fang Tang didn't care even though he was wearing some of the fanciest clothes Fang Li had seen in his life. Some of the mud had stained the nicely embroidered robes. However, Fang Tang didn't pay it much attention. This act alone shows how much Fang Tang cared for this family. It's only been 6 months. And look at how big you have gotten. I almost thought I was looking at Fang Jian. You have grown, my boy. Knew that his uncle was exaggerating. But it was still nice getting praised so highly by the most successful person in their village. He smiled and just replied, "Thank you," entered the house uncle, to the greetings of the rest of the Fang family. Having seen who was approaching, Fang Li's mother, Fang Yuan, and his 2 younger siblings were waiting by the door. In turn, each of the remaining members greeted the visitor. Fang Tang gave each of the younger siblings a pat on the head and snuck them a piece of candy each. Seeing this, Fang Li couldn't help but felt a bit jealous. But he had to remind himself that he wasn't a child in around the dining table. Fang Tang pulled out a small pouch. Inside it was dried tea leaves. Seeing this, Fang Yuan quickly brought over the water that she had boiled earlier in the day. Fang Tang sprinkled a few pinches of leaves into the pot while Fang Da got the cups ready. Tea was a luxury that only the village chief and some of the village elders had, and it was only in a small supply. If an outsider were to see this scene, they would definitely be puzzled as to why a family living in a run-down shack would be drinking tea. And not just the adults but also the 3 kids to take a sip of the tea. Fang Tang began talking. "Big brother Da, I am actually here for 2 reasons. One is official business for the restaurant and the other is an opportunity for Fang Li. Knew that the restaurant inn would send people to the village to buy crops and food. But usually, it was handled by clerks and not the general manager himself. Fang Da knew this because, in the past, clerks have come and purchased their extra grain at very reasonable prices. This younger brother of his has always been looking out for his family and there was no question. That little Tang was behind the hire when he heard what his uncle had said. Could it be that there was another apprenticeship opened, or even better, the army was recruiting again? He didn't dare hope that his dreams of traveling and seeing the world could be within grasp. What opportunity do you speak of? In their hearts, the husband and wife Dup were feeling conflicted. They knew that these were opportunities of a lifetime. But each time Fang Tang came with something, one of their kids were inevitably leave the co-op. While they are proud of them, they would still miss them. I am the general manager of the 7 Spice Restaurant Inn. But what very few people here know is that the true owners of the 7 Spice is actually a martial arts sect, 7 Stars sect. They are the owners of many businesses in the city and even some from the nearby cities. They are one of the strongest sects in a 100-mile radius. In the sect, I am only a middle-level administrator and not even a true member of the sect. The true members are all martial disciples. The other reason that I am here is that in a little over a month, there will be an entrance exam to become a true member of the 7-Star sect. Even if you can't become a martial disciple of the inner sect, you still have a chance to be an administrator in the outer sect and help manage a business like me. The only people who can take the exam are those between 9 and 11. With my recommendation, we can secure a spot for Fang Li in the exam. But how he plays in one go. Fang Tang was visibly tired and drained the cup of tea in one mouthful. Fang Yuan quickly helped his brother-in-law speak. But as a farmer, he didn't really understand what it meant to be a martial disciple. But he knew that if his son could have a chance to obtain the same status as his brother, and that was already enough for him to be happy for a lifetime. After some more discussion, Fang Li's parents agreed to send their son to the exam. At worst, if he failed, he could come back and tend to the fields like his father. Hearing this, Fang Teng was very happy that his brother and sister-in-law made the right decision. He knew that the two opportunities he had brought to them had resulted in both the eldest and second son moving away, and therefore he wasn't sure if his brother would be willing to potentially
didn't know what to
give
say.
up another son.
Like his father,
He didn't know much about what his uncle was talking about, but it sounded like the adults had already made his choice for him. It seemed that if he were to do well on this test, he could help out his family, which he desperately wanted to do. At the same time, the exam would let him see a small part of the world outside this village that he had to bin.
Walked Fang Teng to the carriage.
I will be back in a month's time to bring Fang Li to the exams. While saying that, he reached his hand into the carriage and brought out a basket. As soon as the basket made its appearance, a strong earthly smell invaded everyone's nostrils. This is prepared for Fang Li. Here are some body-strengthening herbs that I was able to get in the city. Make sure to boil it and give it to Fang Li to drink. It could give him a small advantage in liquid copper. Then it wouldn't be exaggerated to call this liquid silver. Before leaving, he gave the family one more pouch of coin and urged them to use the money to feed little Fang Li as much nutritional food as possible, and to make sure to exercise his body as well. With a final wave, Fang Teng's horse sped off, pulling the carriage for Fang Li. His parents had done what his uncle had suggested and went into the village and bought meat and other nutritious food for him. And every day his mom would make the extremely bitter medicine. Through it all, he didn't complain once. As for the exercises, he wasn't sure about what he should do, so he ended up working in the fields with his father for long periods of time. At least that way his father would be able to rest a bit more. Sight of Fang Teng's carriage could be seen in the distance. Moments later, it had arrived in front of the house. The Fang couple knew that this was the day and had already packed everything in the morning. It was a somber affair. They didn't know when would be the next time they could see this son of theirs. If Fang Li were to make it through the exams, he would likely stay in the sect for training. It could be years before he could come back to the village, and they were off. He stuck his head out the window and watched as his mother, father, and his two younger siblings, and the run-down shack he grew up in faded away in the distance. He wanted to jump out and tell everyone that he wouldn't go anymore and that he would stay with his parents forever. But he knew that was just the child within him saying that. In the end, he bit his lips and let the tears flow freely down his face. He promised himself that one day he would be back and his parents wouldn't have to worry about money anymore.